Hello, this is Carl Weintrack for the Daily Music Break. I'm thrilled today to present part two of our conversation with Dr. Richard F. Thomas. Dr. Thomas is the George Martin Lane Professor of the Classics at Harvard University. Every 4 years, um, Richard teaches an undergraduate class entitled Why Bob Dylan Matters. He published a book by the same name in 2017 and is currently updating it to include the album Rough and Rowdy Ways, which was released in June. Welcome, Richard, Dr. Thomas. Thank you so much for taking time out to chat. Um, I told you I was going to joke that we, by miraculously, both wore the same clothes as during part one of the conversation. So
Yeah, I got many sets of this shirt.
and I say no joke is too good to be overused or something like that. We've been talking about what to me really is my high level reaction is obviously Bob Dylan is one of the greats, and everybody knows that. Talking to you, I'm surprised at the real depth of his greatness. You know, through your eyes, that he stands right up there. I mean, maybe not with obviously with Homer or Virgil, but is a worthy person to respond or to use their art. He's not, he's a very deep guy. And that is not surprising to me that he's deep, but I guess that he's so deep. Is that you've been reading the classics your whole life and listening to Dylan your whole life? Does it still surprise you at all at the depth of what he's accomplished?
Yeah, let's. By the way, just the continuation of the book. That is the article, like, and I crossed the Rubicon. Another classical Dylan came out in the Dylan Review, which is a free online Dylan outlet, just in its second year. I'm not probably going to add that to the book, but that's a self-stand. But it could be a final chapter or so far final chapter, but just to clarify that. Yeah, it doesn't. So Dylan was born in Duluth, Minnesota, moved to Hibbing when he was a kid, grew up, got out of there as far and went on to become Bob Dylan, went on to become a genius. You know, someone like Virgil was born in a backwater town, Mantua. It's a lovely little Italian city now in northern Italy. Went to school in Milan, bigger center, ended up in Rome, but because of his poetry became somebody who for 2,000 years has appealed to generation after generation after generation. If you had encountered Virgil, who was just a normal person born in the wrong place, he might have said, as Dylan has said, born to the wrong parents. His father may have been a beekeeper. You wouldn't have thought that he would have become the figure without whom Dante couldn't have written his Inferno, without whom Paradise Lost would have looked very different, without whom pastoral poetry through to Seamus Heaney wouldn't have existed or would have looked very different. So you can only sort of talk about it in the rear view mirror, and Dylan's not yet entirely in the rear view mirror, but thank God, we those of us who are devoted to his art have had the extreme privilege of living our lives in the time in which he was born, practiced his art, and reached the levels of perfection that he has. So, you said, Dylan's not Virgil, not Homer. I'm not sure. I mean, 50 years from that now, I hope Homer and Virgil will still be read, and I think they will. But I think Dylan, and I think the preservation of Dylan in media, that is Dylan's performance. We haven't talked about performance yet, but the preservation of Dylan performing Dylan with technology, will be around for as long as that technology and its successors are around. And I think Dylan will be around basically because of, I mentioned a couple of the songs, but because of his art and what it does to us as human beings. That song is what, 55 years old at this point, I Want You, but it works. It worked in Todd Haynes's amazing scene when Robbie and the woman are getting together. It works in Girl of the North Country on Broadway as a duet. And it works particularly when Dylan is singing it and performing it for me, but like all great art, it can transcend and exist in perfection separate from its author, at least those two cases in film and on stage show that. And so that we have to imagine ourselves another 50 or 100 years out, looking back at what Dylan was and not having lived through the prejudice about him just being a protest singer, living through the lens of right-wing pro-Vietnam people who saw him as somebody to be ejected, somebody who was responsible for all of the troubles, the turmoil of the 60s, although Dylan himself was just writing songs, which happened to be exquisite songs. So we have to let him become, or his art become, what it will become, in my view, has already become, but what it will persist in becoming. Whatever the audience, and to be a classic, you don't have to have a huge audience. So Homer and Virgil, how many people read them, but they're still read, and those who discover them communicate their discovery to those who come after. That's sort of what I do. That's what I'm paid to do anyway. And I think the same will happen with Dylan.
I'm going to ask you, not an A-B, but I'm going to say two things, and please build on the one that's most interesting to you. Do your classics grad students, how do they react to the fact that, Professor Thomas is, quote unquote, a Dylan freak? And how do the kids in the other undergraduate class react to the classics? Is there, when you put it all together and put it on campus, what is kind of the reaction to this professor's, a classics professor and a huge fan of Dylan? How does that, is it an interesting kind of thing that comes out of that?
It's I mean, the student reaction of this is probably like the reaction of the public in general. So my graduate students, when Love and Theft came out and we heard Virgil on Lonesome Day Blues, I wasn't the only one who heard it.
Mm-hmm.
I had 3 or 4 graduate students at that point who were Dylan fans. They had come on board in the 80s when they were teenagers,
mm-hmm.
or the early 90s. Well, yeah, for that album, yeah, more the 80s. And likewise, the undergraduates. When I teach the freshman seminar, I usually will have 2 to 4 of the 12 to 15 students in the seminar will know Dylan extremely well and know 50-year-old songs extremely well, and not just some of them, yes, but many of them not, just because their parents or grandparents played them, but rather because they've discovered Dylan because of Dylan, not because of some family connection. They've discovered Dylan because they care about music and literature. So classics students, I think, are as capable as any, and more capable than many 18, 19, 24-year-old people out there of appreciating what Dylan is. Now you do get, there was a class of classics professor and classics students still exist out there to some extent who are who are, shall we say, aesthetically conservative, so who would like classical music but not listen to anything that was pop, or would follow opera but wouldn't believe in following contemporary music. But that to me is a not something I care to think too much about or worry too much about. Opera was once pop, it was popular. That's all pop is, before it became classic.
Mhm.
And the same goes for Dylan. Now there's 60s music that didn't make it. It made it in my memory. So a line of, the Hollies song, or some other song will come into my mind, but that's not a song that will outlast my memory of it from my 12-year-old self that heard it and thought it was terrific.
I remember when I was a kid, my mother went to Pembroke and she was a literature major. And she came to, I think, to my brother and said, there's this song, I'd like you to write down the lyrics for me. And it was Incense and Peppermint by the Strawberry Alarm Clock. I don't know if you remember that one, but she, was, she thought that was real poetry.
Right.
When he was saying that, it just popped into my mind.
Yeah, well, we listened to this stuff, and we shouldn't reject it. We shouldn't be too sort of hostile about it. It mattered to our 13, 14, 15-year-old selves, and even if the music was sort of popular. But now, so I mean, look at the mid 60s and look at what the Beatles were singing, as Dylan was doing It's All Right Ma. Writing and singing stuff that had never been heard before, and that was in a poetic tradition that went back through, French symbolism to Blake to any number of other poets, in a tradition that was not pop. That was not where pop was coming from. But
this has been fascinating for me, reading what you wrote and watching the video and speaking to you. I love Dylan, but there's always been something I, quite frankly, didn't love about him. And I could never really put my finger on it. And the thought came to me that these great poets created myths. I'm finally asking you a question that I think was actually on the list I sent you. That these poets created myths. And I'm wondering if, to some extent, the way Dylan has conducted himself or lived his life is almost like he was, and it sounds negative, but it's really not, but he was trying to some extent create a myth around himself. It's kind of, elliptical might not be the right word, but, some of his statements, that movie he made, Rondo and Clara, something of that nature.
Yeah.
And whether obviously it's subjective, whether there is some myth making on his own part, and bring it back to where I started the question, is maybe that's what I'm reacting against on an unconscious level.
Yeah, that's a great and big question. Yeah, so what's myth? Myth is from the Greek muthos, which means a very fundamental word meaning story, narrative, tale, and Bob Dylan created a story about Bob Dylan, and he gave Bob Dylan a name for that figure and said, I'm only Bob Dylan when I have to be Bob Dylan, which is another way of saying, you know, the point he got from Rambo and others, that I is another, so that the issue of the identity of the character in the song, and our journalistic desire to understand and know about the lives of the people we care about is such that there's a desperate desire to know, you know, what Bob Dylan has for breakfast, what he's thinking about this, that, and the other. And I think he realized very early on. You look at the December '65 San Francisco interview that's on YouTube, and you know, here's this guy, you know, 24-year-old who doesn't quite understand what's happening yet, and says, you know, I'm going to stick around, you know, as long as it lasts, and he clearly, in my view, doesn't quite know what's happening. He knows about his art. He's been practicing and honing and developing that. He likewise the personas. He's at this point gone through the Guthrie stage, but you know, 2 years earlier he sounds like Woody Guthrie because he's listened to Woody Guthrie songs and he's becomes Woody Guthrie. He, as he says in the Nobel lecture, he learned the vernacular of Guthrie and other folk songs. The vernacular, literally the slave language is what the word means, but it means the common language. And so he actually became the characters of those folk songs in his songs. Now, what he was like when he gets up in the morning, who knows? And I don't really care. I mean, I've been studying dead poets who've been dead for 2 millennia all my life, so I don't really need. I'm interested in the person Bob Dylan, but for his art, I don't really need to know those things any more than I need to know what Virgil drank or didn't drink. So yeah, he's been creating myths and a series of myths, and that's why I think I'm Not There is such a great movie. I think the best movie, in some ways the best work that captures Dylan by putting in the screen in front of us, you know, different age, different ethnic characters who are clearly Bob Dylan at various stages. And Haynes, I think, brilliantly sort of decided to do that as a way of presenting us with the mask. That's why mask has been so important in Dylan's art, you know, from wearing whiteface during Rolling Thunder to the various hats, you know, which go along with the rest of the costume, as creating a character, whether a vaudeville character or the Civil War general or a hipster, mid-60s hipster, or a Huck Finn, you know, sort of folk singing character in the sort of earlier 60s. Yeah, he once said to Bono, you know, now you have to discover yourself or invent yourself, which I think people generally took as, you're referring to needing to create the mask through which you speak, the mask, the persona. So to be a Latin professor here for a minute, but the persona is the thing through which the sound sona comes. So that is, a persona is a mask that which you speak through, and the mask is both a barrier but also an aid to what you are speaking as in terms of your art. So yeah, myth making is what it's all about, and that allows you to feel that the song is coming from a place of authenticity, whether or not it's something that the artist is actually feeling. That's irrelevant. He's creating the authentic impression through the song and the arrangement, the intonation, the phrasing, everything about the performance.
Well, you know, a couple of things. What you say is also interesting. Another thing that A. Dylan had to figure out is how to how a rock and roll star can grow old. Unfortunately, a lot of those folks like Hendrix and Janis Joplin didn't have to answer that question, unfortunately. But Dylan and the Rolling Stones and everyone, they did. They were old men now.
Yeah, Dylan almost didn't have to answer that question.
Right.
Yeah.
But thankfully he does. And my understanding is that he freely changes the lyrics of his songs. You know, you go watch. I'm a big Steely Dan fan, of course. Before, well, they used to tour a lot. And you would go see them. It would be beautiful. It would be great, but it would be exactly the same each time, and it would be exactly like the record. But apparently, Dylan, you would know far more about this than I'll ever know. Freely changes the lyrics. It's an organic. His songs are organic things that didn't stop being alive once they got put down in an album. They keep growing. So that might be his way of dealing with growing older.
Yeah, I mean, what he thinks about growing, he presumably thinks the same that all of us think about growing old. It's not great, but it's better than the alternative. Yeah, you can come at that from two ends. You can come at it from Bob Dylan's Dream, which is a song that he wrote when he was in London, age 21. What's it? Yeah. Anyway, about memories of a long past youth, which in reality was just 2 or 3 years earlier with the friends back then, and a song that's rooted in a folk song, Lady Franklin's Lament from the mid 19th century. But that's a song that the singer there could be quite old, could be remembering the days of youth and wishing that those days could come back. And it's not a song he sings a lot in performance. Or you can take the song I mentioned, I Want You, or Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. Don't Think Twice, It's All Right is that you just kind of wasted my precious time. Don't think twice, it's all right, which is not real nice to a girlfriend who's no longer a girlfriend and who's wasted my time. But of course, the fact that the song says that shows that she didn't waste his time and that he still cares, it still matters. But then he sings that in performance, as people have noticed. It's not with there's no venom in don't, you just kind of wasted my precious time. Don't think twice, it's all right. It's don't think twice, it's all right.
Right.
And you think, yeah, I guess it is all right now. We're not 25 anymore, we're 65, 75. But the song works. But that song, to work in performance with a new arrangement, had to be written in a certain way decades before, in the way that, let's say, the songs of Let It Bleed, which, my favorite Stones album from when it came out and from when I saw the Stones live in New Zealand, back when I was 19 years old. Those songs, apart from the Robert Johnson song, those songs don't work so well in the voice of an older singer and conjuring up an older situation. A favorite flavor, Cherry Red, and so on, is that belongs in its cultural moment, its chronological moment. And Dylan's songwriting, I think, always, and particularly in later years, has worked that way. But I made up my mind to give myself to you. Is it a love song? Is it a song about religion? But either way, it's a song that works for a 19-year-old. I've made up my mind, after thinking about it, to give myself to you, as well as it works for a 79-year-old who wrote the song.
What I say about the Stones is they've become the world's best Stones tribute band. Is really kind of the idea. So the mistake I made was that this actually we should have done 3 parts and not 2, because this part was too long also, but that's because all the content was so great.
And because I talk too much, probably.
No. As I was saying that, I was thinking that could be interpreted that way, and that is absolutely not what I meant to say. Is you have a lot to say, so it's almost like that line in the Dylan song. It's all the intonation. Anyway, I would like to thank you very, very much for taking time out. It's been fascinating, and I thought it was only rock and roll. And I guess rock and roll is, I guess it goes back to the Stones song. I will have a link to your book on Amazon.
Great.
In the post. And again, I'd like to thank you and your Dr. Richard Thomas, the George Martin Lane Professor of Classics at Harvard University. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Likewise, Carl. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you. And yeah. Let me know when it's up, and
okay,
that'd be fun.
Beautiful. This is Carl Weinschenk for the Daily Music Break at www.dailymusicbreak.com. Thank you, everybody.